along for the ride.
Welcome to the Solar Coaster, the wild ride to the solar industry told by the people living it every day. I'm Anna Covert.
And I'm Alex Herrera.
Imagine you've just engineered the ultimate sports car. The engine is flawless, the aerodynamics are perfect, and the fuel it runs on is completely free. You've got millions of people lining up, cash in hand, ready to buy it. But there is a massive problem. You can't find any tires. And without tires, that beautiful high-tech machine is just an expensive lawn ornament.
That is probably the most accurate way to describe the exact moment we are living through in the renewable energy transition right now. We have perfected the engine, the sun is providing the free fuel, but the global supply chain is entirely out of tires.
It really is the great irony of our time. For decades, the entire conversation around green energy and specifically solar power was about demand and technology. We asked, can we make the panels efficient enough? And can we make them cheap enough so people actually want them? Well, fast forward to today, and the answers are a resounding yes. We are looking at global solar installations approaching a staggering 600 gigawatts this year. To put that in perspective, that is a mind-bending amount of power. But suddenly, the narrative has completely flipped. The biggest threat to the solar revolution isn't climate denial, it isn't a lack of funding, and it certainly isn't a lack of sunlight. It is the sheer, unglamorous reality of logistics.
Exactly. And that shift is catching a lot of people off guard. We are so conditioned to look at the energy system through the lens of oil and gas. Whenever there's a disruption in the liquefied petroleum markets or a sudden oil shock, the whole world panics. We treat it as a massive fragility in our global system. But by obsessing over oil shocks, we are completely missing the much larger structural earthquake happening right beneath our feet. The solar industry has officially transitioned from a technology-driven market to an industrial capacity market. The question is no longer, will people buy solar? The question is, can we physically dig the dirt, forge the steel, build the factories, and ship the parts fast enough to build what we've already promised to build?
Which brings us to the actual hardware, because the technology itself is doing exactly what we wanted it to do. The panels are getting slimmer, they are using fewer raw materials per unit, and their power output is actually rising. It is an engineering marvel. But that incredible efficiency is almost acting like a smokescreen, hiding the massive logistical nightmare happening behind the scenes.
It is a classic bottleneck scenario. Every single solar project, whether it is a rooftop in a suburb or a massive utility-scale farm in the desert, relies on an incredibly complex, tightly woven industrial ecosystem. You need polysilicon refining, you need wafer production, you need cell and module manufacturing, and then you need the power electronics to actually connect it all to the grid. The problem is that growth across these different segments is wildly uneven. We might have a surplus of one component, but a massive deficit of another. And because the system is so tightly linked, the entire chain can only move as fast as its slowest link.
And let's talk about where those links are actually located, because that is where the geopolitical alarm bells start ringing. For a long time, the globalized economy operated on the assumption that you just manufacture wherever it is cheapest and you ship it to wherever it is needed. But right now, something like 80% of the global manufacturing capacity across the entire solar value chain is concentrated in just one country.
Yes, China dominates the landscape right now, and regardless of where you stand on global trade, from a purely logistical and risk management perspective, having 80% of your critical infrastructure pipeline concentrated in one geographic region is incredibly fragile. It exposes the entire global energy transition to trade disputes, shipping bottlenecks, and geopolitical tensions. If a major port shuts down, or if a new tariff is introduced, the ripple effects are felt on solar construction sites all over the world within weeks.
It makes you wonder about the hidden costs of globalization. We spent the last 40 years optimizing the world for cost efficiency, stripping away redundancies to make things as cheap as possible. But in doing so, we sacrificed resilience. And now, when we are trying to literally rewire the energy infrastructure of the entire planet, we are realizing that without resilience, cost efficiency doesn't matter. If the parts don't arrive, the project fails. But what fascinates me the most isn't even the high-tech silicon or the complex geopolitics. It's the incredibly basic, low-tech materials that are holding up the future of energy. We are talking about basic structural systems,
This is where the reality of physical construction hits the spreadsheets of project developers. When people think of solar, they picture the shiny blue panels. They rarely think about the thousands of tons of heavy steel required to hold those panels up. Structural systems, specifically trackers and mounting infrastructure, have become one of the most severe pressure points in the entire industry.
Trackers being the mechanical systems that slowly tilt the panels throughout the day so they follow the sun, right?
Exactly. To get the maximum financial return and energy output from a solar farm, the panels need to track the sun. But to build those trackers, you need massive volumes of very specific, highly engineered steel components. You need piles driven deep into the earth. You need torque tubes. You need customized brackets. And right now, getting your hands on that steel, getting it fabricated, getting it galvanized to prevent rust, and then physically trucking it to a remote project site is causing massive delays.
It is almost poetic in a dark way. We have harnessed the quantum mechanics of photovoltaic cells to capture the power of a star, but we can't turn the lights on because we are waiting on a truckload of galvanized steel tubes.
It is the ultimate reality check, and it gets even more complicated when you realize that the solar industry isn't operating in a vacuum. Solar is now directly competing with other massive, fast growing sectors for the exact same raw materials. Think about the electric vehicle boom. Think about the massive global push to upgrade grid infrastructure. EVs, power lines, and solar farms all desperately need steel and aluminum. So you have this multi industry bidding war for foundational metals that drives up costs, it tightens supply, and it stretches out lead times to a point where project schedules start to look like works of fiction.
So, if I am a developer and I signed a contract 2 years ago saying I would deliver a fully operational solar farm by next month based on the material prices and timelines of 2 years ago, I am currently in a lot of trouble.
You are in a tremendous amount of trouble. And that is why we are seeing a fundamental structural change in how these projects are approached. The realization has finally hit that solar deployment is no longer limited by a single high tech component. It is completely constrained by the ability of the entire heavy industrial supply chain to move in perfect synchronization.
Which naturally brings the government into the room. Because when the free market starts failing to deliver critical infrastructure, policymakers tend to step in. We are seeing a massive pivot in how governments view green energy. It used to be about offering tax credits to consumers to buy the panels. Now it seems like the focus has shifted entirely to industrial policy. We are suddenly seeing a race to build factories.
It is a massive paradigm shift. Governments have finally realized that energy security and manufacturing capacity are exactly the same thing. In the United States, you have sweeping recent legislation designed specifically to incentivize the domestic production of everything from the raw upstream materials to the batteries and the finished modules. Europe is aggressively pivoting towards supply chain resilience and trying to diversify where they get their parts. India is pouring capital into integrated manufacturing, trying to build an ecosystem where the raw dirt goes in one end of the factory and a finished solar module comes out the other.
They are trying to rebuild the entire industrial base from scratch. But here's the philosophical question. Can you just legislate a supply chain into existence? You can pass a bill, you can allocate billions of dollars, but you can't print a steel mill. You can't instantly manifest a workforce of specialized engineers and fabricators.
And that is the exact friction point we are sitting on today. Building heavy manufacturing capacity takes an immense amount of time and a staggering amount of capital. There is a massive time gap between a politician signing a policy into law and a factory actually producing its first batch of solar modules. And it is within that gap that all of our current constraints live.
That gap is going to create a lot of chaos. People expect progress to be a straight line. We look at charts showing the adoption of smartphones or the internet, and it's just this smooth, beautiful curve going up and to the right. We expect the green energy transition to look exactly like that, but what you are describing is not a smooth curve. It is going to be incredibly jagged.
The term the industry uses is nonlinear growth, and it is something everyone from investors to the general public needs to brace for. Because these supply constraints are becoming so visible and so severe, the growth of solar power is going to happen in fits and starts. Forecasting has never been more difficult or more critical. If you are a developer, a manufacturer, or an engineering firm, you have to align your project pipeline with the brutal reality of what is actually available. You cannot plan based on what the policy says. You have to plan based on how much steel is actually sitting in the warehouse.
Because if you don't, you end up overcommitting. You get a scenario where local governments approve permits, companies schedule the labor, the press releases go out, and then everyone just stands around an empty dirt lot for a year waiting for torque tubes to arrive from across the ocean.
Exactly. And the financial fallout from that kind of overcommitment can be devastating. This is why the shift from demand-driven growth to supply-constrained execution is forcing a total evolution across the entire value chain. Developers can no longer just assume the parts will be there. They have to build massive supply chain variations into their financial models. Engineering and construction contractors can't rely on a single supplier anymore. They have to aggressively diversify where they source their materials. Manufacturers have to figure out how to expand their operations regionally rather than just building one mega factory in a single country.
And policymakers have to understand that throwing money at the consumer doesn't help if there is nothing for the consumer to buy. They have to align their incentives with actual physical scalability. It really makes you step back and look at the history of human progress. For the last century, our energy transitions were entirely defined by access to resources, who had the coal, who had the oil. Then, for the last 20 years, it was defined by technology, who has the smartest engineers, who can design the most efficient silicon cell. But today, we have entered a completely new era.
We have entered the era of execution. Solar energy is no longer limited by how efficiently we can convert sunlight into electricity. The physics and the engineering have largely been solved. The only thing limiting us now is our own industrial muscle. It is strictly about how fast we can scale the heavy machinery of human industry to support the generation of that power.
It is a humbling realization. We are trying to build a clean, ethereal, high-tech future, but the toll booth to get there is made of heavy steel, sweat, and logistics. It means that the true heroes of the solar decade aren't going to be the software developers or the theoretical physicists. They are going to be the supply chain managers, the logistics coordinators, and the factory floor operators.
Without a doubt, supply chains are no longer just a back office function. They are the absolute center of the energy transition. The speed at which we can deploy solar is entirely dictated by the resilience of those supply networks. As we look at the next 10 years, the companies and the countries that will ultimately define the future of energy won't be the ones with the most ambitious plans or the flashiest PowerPoint presentations. It will be the ones who actually prioritize, invest in, and master the gritty reality of supply chain resilience. The future belongs to those who can actually deliver the hardware, not just those who plan for it.
So as we look toward this massive 600 gigawatt milestone and beyond, the question we all need to be asking isn't whether solar power will win the energy race. The demand is there, the technology is there. The real question, the one that will define the next decade of human infrastructure, is whether our global industrial machine is resilient enough to actually build the future we've designed, or if we will be left staring at a perfect blueprint, waiting on a shipment of steel that never arrives.
Hop on a solar coaster, come along for the ride.
This episode of The Solar Coaster is narrated using AI-generated technology, representing Anna Covert and Alex Herrera. The material presented is aggregated from publicly available solar industry news sources. All commentary reflects reported industry developments and does not constitute personal opinions, investment advice, or endorsements by the hosts or
Solar
producers.
Coaster is proudly sponsored by Sun Energy Today, redefining what solar means for business and infrastructure. We engineer and deliver large-scale clean energy solutions, from megawatt solar farms to advanced graphene storage, designed for resilience, performance, and measurable return. Sun Energy Today, built to power what's next. Learn more at sunenergytoday.com.